We have a lot of news to cover in today's video, including some offseason free agent rumors concerning guys like Dustin Byfuglien and Braden Holtby. We want to look at the possibility of Montreal trading Max Domi. We have some injury updates, plus there's a major lawsuit against the Canadian Hockey League. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a ton of news to discuss today, so let's jump right in. First up, we have some injury updates for players that would be entering the playoffs when the NHL playoffs resume here later this summer, mostly on the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets will most likely be without forward Josh Andersson. In case you don't recall, he had surgery for a torn labrum back in March, and it is about a 6-month recovery. Sometimes they have recovery closer to 4 months, so at the earliest, it is possible that maybe he could be back, but most likely wouldn't be available till about September. So unless the Blue Jackets go on a deep run, very unlikely that we see Andersson during the playoff season. But on a better note, a defenseman and one of their top players, Seth Jones, has fully recovered from his injury and has been activated and will be good to go when play resumes. A quick signing update for you as well. Vancouver Canucks forward Nikolai Goldobin is leaving the NHL and leaving the Vancouver Canucks to head over to play in the KHL. He signed a 2-year contract with CSKA Moscow. Goldobin had a couple of really terrific seasons in the AHL for the Utica Comets in the Canucks minor league system. He's got to play about 125 NHL games, mostly with Vancouver, a few with San Jose before the trade, and was kind of progressing decently, but then kind of fell out of favor. Last year, he spent majority of the year in the minors, was a point per game plus producer at the AHL level, and just really doesn't seem to be a fit for Vancouver moving forward. They have a lot of forward depth, and he just got passed by a lot of their other younger top prospects here. So he's heading over to the KHL for the next 2 years. An update as well: New York Rangers prospect forward Lias Andersson, of course, who's been subject to a lot of trade rumors and speculation over the last number of months after abruptly leaving the team and heading back to Sweden. Of course, Andersson's played a moderate amount of NHL games, but has also spent a fair bit of time in their American Hockey League team, and was left the AHL team back in January to head back over to Sweden. Didn't even really give the team notice. Ended up being suspended. They've been trying to smooth things over. He did get a chance to play in Sweden towards the end of the year. Seemed to be productive and looking pretty good. There was rumors before that there was a lot of progressive talks with the Rangers and Andersson on a potential return and potentially kind of smoothing things over and rejoining the team. He was invited to join the Rangers for their upcoming training camp to get ready for the 24-team NHL playoffs that are coming up here hopefully soon, but he declined and is opted to stay over in Sweden, saying that he felt that was best for him personally at this time. There's obviously reports on this from the New York Post and Larry Brooks, where he did get some comments from John Davidson on the situation as well. And of course, the Rangers are okay with him staying over in Sweden, but Brooks feels because of this decline in invite, this more likely means that he does not return to the Rangers, possibly ever. There's a good possibility he starts playing in Sweden for next season. Of course, the Swedish teams right now are expected to start their season on time this fall, so he will have an opportunity to play there. With the next NHL season likely getting pushed back into the later part of the winter, around December or January. He'll likely already be midway through a year and probably spends a year over in Sweden. Even if he is traded by the Rangers to another organization, there's still a possibility he stays in Sweden for at least one more season, and I guess we'll see if he ever makes a return, but at this point it looks doubtful he'll ever play for the Rangers again. As I mentioned as well, there was a significant news story come up today. A couple of former Canadian Hockey League players and former NHL players as well, Daniel Carcillo and Garrett Taylor, have launched a class action lawsuit against the CHL and all three of its league in the Ontario Hockey League, the Western Hockey League, and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Obviously, this has to do with a lot of the things that junior players often have to go through. They allege a lot of different allegations, whether it be from hazing, different forms of abuse, and there's some pretty substantial claims. So this is going to be a very interesting news story here to follow. There's a lot of details that we could go into, and I may do another dedicated video on it here in the coming days. There's a lot of information revealed. Of course, Carcillo played in the OHL and Taylor played in the Western Hockey League. They both have their own separate experiences here to talk about. Of course, we recently saw another former OHL player come out and talk about the fact that he endured a lot of hazing and abuse as well. So this is something I personally would like to see get out of the sport and really sports in general. Unfortunately, it is something that does take place. I know from my own accounts, growing up playing a lot of sports, I never played at that level of hockey, but I know it is a common practice, unfortunately, something I was never fond of, and it really needs to stop. Kids go through quite a bit and are forced to do a lot of things that they don't really want to, but try to become fit in and make the team, and just a lot of stuff going on. So it's going to be a very interesting story here to follow as more details emerge on this lawsuit. As I mentioned as well, I want to take a look at some NHL offseason rumors, and first up I want to look at an article from Sportsnet, Andrew Berkshire, looking at a mailbag article where he's asked some very interesting questions that I thought we should take a look at here. The first one being around potential free agent goaltender Braden Holtby. At this point, Holtby's contract with the Washington Capitals is set to expire. Many feel he's pretty much going to be as good as gone from Washington. They will not be able to afford to keep him in the fold due to their cap issues, and of course they have Lias Andersson, who appears to be more than ready to take over the starting goaltender position away from Holtby anyway, so it only makes sense that they kind of let him go on his way, let Samsonov take over, helps them with the cap, and lets their goalie of the future gain some valuable experience and getting more games played. So what happens to Braden Holtby is a big question here in this article, and I found Berkshire's answer very interesting. So basically, he feels that in the last 3 years, the Holtby's been moderate at best. He said mediocre to bad in a lot of cases, and I do think it's fair to say that Holtby deserves his fair share of criticism on his play and inconsistencies in the last few years. Now, I know a couple of years back, he made up for a strong playoff run when they won the Stanley Cup, but his regular season really wasn't good, and he really hasn't been quite the same goaltender that he was earlier in his career. Of course, he's got a Vezina Trophy and his Stanley Cup to his resume and now, so he certainly has a solid resume with a solid past, but things are changing. He's going to be 31 come this fall, and clearly he's going to be looking for a decent amount of money given his past performance. He's been making around $6 million per year, so it's quite likely he's certainly not going to be looking to make less money ideally, but it might be challenging given the new landscape of the NHL free agent market due to the pandemic and due to the NHL pause and all the lost revenue to get any kind of a big time contract. So Berkshire's take here is that Holtby would be a prime example of a player he feels very well could take a short-term contract, possibly even a one-year deal. Likely ends up with a team that might not be quite a contender, somebody who's like a solid playoff contender at least, and needs a couple of extra pieces to really take a step forward to become a more solid cup contender. And the team that he pointed out he felt would make a lot of sense was the Calgary Flames. Now, for a variety of reasons here, of course, they have David Rittich, who appears to have the starting goaltender situation pretty much under control, but they did give Cam Talbot a fair bit of playing time this past year. It's been rumored that Talbot is looking for more of an opportunity to get back to being a starting goaltender. He's also a free agent, so it's quite possible he leaves the Flames via free agency this offseason, and that Holtby could come in and kind of replace what Talbot did and be a 1A, 1B type of goaltending situation with David Rittich. Of course, he'd be a great mentor for Rittich. Clearly, Holtby, like I said, gets some really valuable experience, has a Vezina Trophy and a Stanley Cup to his name. Kind of give them a little bit more of a solid 1A, 1B situation. Obviously, they have a pretty solid prospect goalie in Dustin Wolf kind of waiting in the wings, but he's going to need some time to continue to develop before he's going to be NHL ready, and it kind of takes the pressure off them pushing him, and at the same time gives Holtby a chance later in his career to maybe help the Flames really take a big step forward. I think a lot of what the Flames do in this offseason will be dependent on how they do in this 2014 playoff format. Of course, they have to do battle with Canadian rival the Winnipeg Jets, and obviously many people, myself included, feel that the Jets have a pretty good chance to win that series, and there's been a lot of talk that if the Flames didn't have playoff success this year, that general manager Brad Treliving very well could make some moves to kind of break up part of that core group of players that they've had in place for some time, and then maybe we could even see a more substantial move like a Johnny Gaudreau trade or something to that effect. I know we've discussed the possibilities before, and I think that is a pretty good possibility if they don't have that level of success. I've heard some people say they feel like they'll get one more year to see what they can do before anything significant were to take place. Really hard to say. Either way, a goaltending change and bringing in a guy like Holtby could make sense. Now, of course, he's played in Washington his entire career, but he was originally born in Saskatchewan, so it's not quite home, but it's pretty close to home. Gets him back to Canada, gets him back to the prairies, not too far from home, so he might kind of feel somewhat of a homecoming in that regard, and something that Holtby might be open to if he takes a 1 or 2 year contract, kind of reprove himself, maybe have an opportunity to take the starting netminder job and then get a longer term contract afterwards for probably the remainder of his career somewhere else if he were to move on after that short stint in Calgary. But going to Calgary on a short-term contract does make sense. If you're a Flames fan, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Of course, there are other teams out there as well that could benefit from Holtby's services, but to me, that mid-level team who's been making the playoffs but need a couple of pieces to step forward and really become a more solid team certainly makes a lot of sense that Holtby could be one of those pieces for a team like that. Now, as well, this article also talks about the Montreal Canadiens and the possibility of signing unrestricted free agent defenseman Dustin Byfuglien. That's, of course, if he even wants to play, but apparently there were some rumors back in April suggesting that general manager Marc Bergevin had some interest, and there was even some rumors that there were talks. I cannot confirm if there were actual talks or not, of course, but I know I did hear some rumblings back a few months ago about that type of possibility, and obviously this article talks about, would it make sense for Montreal to go down that road and engage Byfuglien in conversations about signing a free agent contract. Of course, at this point, Byfuglien can sign a contract anytime. He's already a UFA. He doesn't necessarily have to wait for the upcoming NHL offseason, but it's really unclear at this point if he even wants to play. I know there was a lot of the problems with Winnipeg. It wasn't so much geared at the team specifically, as a lot of the talk early on was his desire to play. He was battling injuries, and there was just a lot of things going on. And we never really got I don't think, in my opinion, really a full, true scope of what was entirely going on behind the scenes there. But certainly, if you think about the possibility, it might not cost too much. I mean, Byfuglien's going to be 35 years old. He's going to gone an extended time without playing, so obviously it might not come at a big price tag. And if you could get Dustin Byfuglien on a 1 or 2 year contract without having to pay too much money, it certainly would be worth the gamble. Can you imagine the right side of the Habs defense with Shea Weber, Dustin Byfuglien, and Jeff Petrie? And then on the left side, you can have a guy like Ben Sherratt, Alex Romanov stepping in. For your other spot, you have some different options. Maybe it's Kulak, maybe it's Juleson, Victor Mente. You have some different possibilities there. But, really, that would really add another level of experience back there. He really hasn't missed too much of a beat offensively. He's certainly slowed a little bit, not as strong defensively as he was earlier in his career. But Byfuglien really could play that variety role where he could play a little bit on special teams, maybe third pair kind of minutes, so he's not, overworked. Obviously, at this point, he'd have lots of time to rehab his ankle. It's an intriguing possibility. It's really difficult to say if it really has much of a chance of happening, but I do think it's an interesting possibility. I mean, he knows what it's like to play in a Canadian market after playing in Winnipeg for a long time, so he understands about, how the pressure that the Canadian teams get from their local fans and media and all that. So that I don't think would be, anything uninteresting to him. So certainly an intriguing possibility. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this potential situation. Should GM Marc Bergevin try to engage with Dustin Byfuglien, and if he's interested in coming back to play for another year or two, would he be a good fit on the blue line in Montreal? Now, next I want to take a look at another article, also focusing on the Montreal Canadiens, also through Sportsnet. Different author this time, now with Eric Engels, talking about, also in a mailbag type article, answering some fans' questions. And one of the questions was around Max Domi and what they should be doing with him longer term. Now, the big question is Montreal see him as a center or a winger long term? And that is going to certainly depend, I think, on what his future will hold, because right now he's been playing center for him. He's done relatively well, but he certainly has a few deficiencies. We saw his offensive numbers come down this year. Defensively, he's certainly not as strong as a lot of the other more experienced center icemen. Not the greatest on face-off, but he certainly works really hard. Not afraid of the dirty play, and he's a pretty solid offensive guy. Like I said, even though his numbers were down this year, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Last year, he showed a lot of flashes of really strong offensive play, and I'm confident he can get back to that, especially with a healthy Montreal lineup. We saw the Habs really be ravaged by injuries this year, so that certainly played a role in things as well. But one of the big things longer term, I guess, which could possibly benefit Montreal, maybe not so much him, is that they have a lot of prospect center icemen that are developing and could kind of anchor the center position down the middle for the Habs in the years to come. Like guys like Kotkaniemi, you got Ryan Poehling. Of course, Philip Deneau's really turned into a really solid two-way center for them as well. I don't see Deneau as a number one center, but he could be a really good number two or number three in a lot of situations, depending on how these other guys progress over the years. And they have some other prospects in the system as well. Nick Suzuki could possibly be a center as well. I mean, I know he played a fair bit of wing this year, but still Suzuki has that potential as well. So they have a lot of options at the center position, and it's really Max Domi's not trying to play center ice. I think he'd be content playing center or wing wherever he's most needed. But Engels answers this question as saying that he sees possibly that Max Domi could end up with a 1-year contract. I know he's a restricted free agent, needs a new deal. There's been a lot of talk. Do they sign him? Do they trade him? How do they handle this? Do they, got to be careful here not to overpay, because clearly this year wasn't as good as the year before. So there's a lot of wide variety of opinions on this subject on how they handle it, and clearly, like I said, how they view him longer term will play a big role in how it's handled. But if he gets a 1-year contract, Engels feels that there's a pretty good possibility that they kind of want to see how he progresses at center ice, see how their prospects go. They see him as a winger longer term, and they feel that their forward depth at that position is much deeper, than they very well could use him as a trade chip that they have, who could be trade chips to improve other areas of the team. Domi would certainly have a fair bit of value, and like I said, they want to be careful not to overpay and overextend here in this situation. So it's an intriguing possibility. What are your thoughts on the Max Domi situation? Do you feel the Montreal Canadiens and Domi could come to terms on a 1-year contract? And if they feel there are other prospects that developed a lot at the center position, do you see there being a good possibility that Max Domi could very well find himself traded within the next year? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.